Hello and welcome to another special, really special episode of the Offside Musings podcast. My name is Oke Ndibe. It's my delight to welcome you on behalf of my co-host, Emeka Onyagwa. As you can tell, it's been a while since we've been with you. This has been due to a number of factors, and I might as well confess to a profound let me say, depression about developments in Nigeria, our country. And so that's, in a sense, the subject of today's episode. We want to look, and it's going to be very, very brief, on the recent presidential and national assembly elections in Nigeria, with all the hype that preceded that election about INEC's preparations, preparedness, and yet just the disaster that the election became. And so the subject of today's episode is, if the vote in Nigeria was free, fair, and credible, how come the country seems like a funeral? So it's my delight to welcome you to this edition. So Emeka, I'm gonna sort of ask you to have the first stab at this. Yeah. Nigerians, especially the young ones, the youth, came out on February 25 to vote. There was a lot of excitement in the country, and then so much has gone wrong. Usually when an election goes wrong, you know that it's gone wrong. You don't need statisticians to tell you. You don't need political pundits to tell you. The country feels dispirited. There's a sense that this is more a funeral than a celebration. And that's the sense that I get following the February 25 elections. I don't know if you have different impressions.
Yeah, I mean, it's if anybody's been honest, minus any natural, I don't say natural, it's just frontal bias with Nigerians, and I would even say black people generally. If you
let's not tarnish the image of all black people.
Maybe not all black people, but Nigerians in this particular case.
Some Nigerians. Because I want to emphasize that, right? I want to emphasize that we don't see. Yes, there are a few noisy people on social media who feel that if somebody who is of their religious persuasion, of their ethnic affiliation, is rigged into power, that this is something to be boastful of. But I dare say that all over the country, there's a sense that something went profoundly wrong. There's a sense, the best way I describe it is a funeral. So I don't think that there is a massive number of Nigerians from any particular religion or ethnicity who are celebrating, the outcome of the election. There are a few noisy people on social media, and so that's why I'm sort of reluctant.
We can also say there are always a few noisy people who seem to have the space and the power to cement whatever their positions are, right? So it's a very normal occurrence. At the same time, it's something that is in the fabric of Nigerian society. It's something I'll keep saying and saying. In this case, if we're talking about Nigerian society, I keep saying and saying and saying. There are quite a number of people who worked hard to make sure this would be the outcome. And those are the ones you're probably hearing from a lot more. And it's not just people in power, it's everyday people. They're everyday people all around the world, everywhere. Any country you go to, yeah, they have sizable quantities, if not even the majority of their own people, who are always happy for the worst outcome. Because part of the reason is obviously their justification is they don't ever want. There's like it is an ethnic supremacy thing. So you have these kind of people, but generally, the majority of people, in this case, and if we're being honest, the majority of people, it's not one tribe, it's not one ethnic group, it's not, it's widespread. Anybody that wants to be honest, I was trying to say initially, like, if you take away the initial people, whether you want to say it's not the all black people or whether it's not the all Africans or whether this thing doesn't tend to occur in a lot of black, if not all black places to some degree, whether it's in America and you talk about the ADOS movements and their adjacent movements, or you go to other black countries or like what we're seeing in Tunisia right now, who say they're Africans and they're proud of their African heritage and all that. Or you go to xenophobic attacks in Southern Africa, even amongst each other, where you have people like Julius Malema speaking, speaking strongly against these kind of things. It's very much there. But in this case, you had a cross section of people, you had a majority of young people wanting a result. Clearly, I mean, you go into the stats, you go into, I leave that, we have a shorter show today since you'll be traveling. Headed to Nigeria, so I leave that to this. Now, the next show we have, we could get in more into that. But if you go into it, you talk to people, you talk to honest people of any persuasion. Well, again, you talk to the people who are being honest, which in this case, I would say they're the majority of people. There is widespread sadness, there's widespread anger. There probably would have been widespread riots. I could put anything I have on that. Devastating style riots, which was stopped by the candidates, which a lot of people feel won. That's Peter Obi coming out to tell his supporters and his fans to kindly let the process play out. So, absent of that, there would have been widespread. The other candidate, by the way, Atiku Abubakar, led a protest, walked around, carried placards and all that. But obviously it didn't mean much because even though he had a level of support, he clearly and quite honestly never had the majority of the support. So it's hard to just describe how bad this is. The argument from a historical perspective is that in the history of Nigeria, which of the three is worse? The early 50s crisis in the Western region, the crisis in the Western region again in the 60s that led to Operation Wettear and led to the campaigning that cost the more or less pogroms of Igbos in the north, who had nothing to do with that political situation, by the way. I wouldn't put June 12 here in any way, shape, or form. And this one, some people are arguing which one is worse. I personally would tilt towards this one being worse because of the scale and the magnitude. And just the sheerness of it, the whole thing. But it's all there, it's up in the air, so it's bad. That's the moral of the story.
So let me, I do agree with you in general, right? I actually do have, often I have a very dim view of Nigerians. But in this particular case, I think that I saw a certain level and scope and form of mobilization by young people. And I think that ultimately young people, if Nigeria is going to be rescued, the young people are going to do it. And I think that they took the first step on February 25. Like you, I would say that I have very little question at this point that if Peter Obi did not win the election outright, he led it, and that at worst that he would have had to go into a runoff election. So the fact that he is put in third position, I think, is a particularly cynical manipulation of the process. I do agree with you that those who did this always calibrated this, and I think that there's a certain deviousness in those who have this naked pursuit of power that they start over several years, sometimes even decades, to prepare. And so there is a sense among some Nigerians that already the judiciary is bought and sold, that the Electoral Commission, with all the promises, all the pledge by its national chairman that the elections were going to be credible, were going to be free of official manipulation. I think that was a total disaster. So I was listening recently to an interesting analysis by Tedo Peterside, and it looks like what really happened was that in so many different polling units and in so many different states, that corrupt politicians in collusion with depraved electoral officials pretty much just swapped the Labour Party votes for the APC. So there was this transposition, so the Labour Party received the APC's votes and the APC received the Labour Party's votes. Now, if you remember the last episode that we did before the elections, we did state that the elections were going to say something about Nigerians. That if Nigerians elected Tinubu, I said that would be Nigerians saying, we're looking at a man who is mentally and physically and indeed morally depreciated and debilitated. A man who refused to do any debates, a man who on the stump was speaking sometimes in tongues, which in language that nobody could understand. A man clearly who was unable to articulate in a number of sentences his vision and his program for Nigeria. A man who couldn't take questions at Chatham House and had to farm out questions to members of his delegation. So I did say that if Nigerians in their consciousness decided that this was the man they wanted to run their affairs, and a man particularly who took credit for forcing the disaster called Buhari on Nigeria, and a man who has said in so many words that he wanted to continue Buhari's legacy. And this is a legacy that represents a nightmare that I think that most Nigerians want to run away from. So if Nigerians were to legitimately vote for this man, two things that I'll do. First, I'll respect it, because if, every collectivity, every human and every collectivity of humans deserve the right to make their choice. But then that would be a way of Nigerians saying we are sick ourselves, because it's only a sick people who will choose a sick man to run their affairs. I want to say, in fairness to Nigerians, that they did not choose Tinubu as their president. I have no doubt about that. I think that the APC and Tinubu were crushed across the country. Okay? And so what we're dealing with at the present moment is a result that is an absolute fraud, a falsification of the will of the Nigerian people, and indeed a dispossession of Nigerians who came out on February 25 to make their choice. Again, it explains the fact that you see, apart from, again, there are quite a few noisy people on social media. You always find them, right? When Buhari won his last election, you saw the same kind of crowd talking about wailing wailers and so on and so forth. So now it's they sweet us, they pain them, And I say the idiots who engage in this form of false celebration are they going to go to the market and just say, "Hey, I voted for Tinubu," or "Tinubu is my man," and they will get groceries for free? Or if kidnappers grab them, right? Are they going to say, "Hey, I'm a Tinubu man," and get released? If armed robbers plague their neighborhood, are they going to say, "Hey, I'm Tinubu's man," and the armed robbers will say, "Hey, Tinubu is great, so we're going to leave you alone"? So if Tinubu takes over, and I'm not sure at all that that's going to happen, right? I still hold up hope, in a sense, hoping against hope, that the judiciary and the other institutions in Nigeria and the Nigerian people will still rise and ensure that Tinubu, this impunity is not let to stand.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. The reality is you have candidates who, I think Nigerians generally, by and large, let me prefix by, let me start by saying Nigerians by and large are generally intelligent people. I think in spite of the school system, I was watching a YouTube video this morning where the lady was trying to say Nigeria has great schools. I was having a conversation with a friend. I was actually at a friend of mine. We're FaceTiming this morning, and he's actually at Pastor Ja, and was FaceTiming and showing me around, and I've had multiple of these FaceTimes with friends all over the country, and they're showing me around, and it's exactly like you described, not just in the perception on which you're going to experience on your way there now, right? It's also looking around. It feels like it feels like a real father. Well, Nigeria has no father or father figures in history, but it feels like Nigeria had one and the person died. Doesn't feel good. But in spite of that, yes, there are a few noisy people trying to bang people's heads together, largely based on ethnic makeup. I don't know if there are a few. I think they are speaking to people's hardcore sentiments, to be honest. And I think to some degree is resonating with people. Because at the end of the day, we could ignore the way people have been indoctrinated in Nigeria as Nigerians, right from the get-go. But it is the one thing that keeps this mess together as it is. And it's very similar in a lot of places, but we're speaking specifically in Nigeria. So you have a lot of people who have gone out to defend the declared winner. And largely it's based now on ethnic grounds. It's all about decimating your enemies, which is in more of a cynical way. If you want to look at, to me, more of a positive way, you could think of maybe, and funny enough, you could use Trump in this regard. Like, people don't understand the law of Trump. They talk about all these things, and Trump is this, Trump is that, Trump has done this, and they don't get that most of the people that voted for Trump are not in love with Trump. He's their man. He's their man against culture wars. He's their man against wokeism, or whatever term you might want to use. He's their guy against that. If you use that in a more cynical way, a lot of people pushed for this result because Tinubu is their man in an ethnic supremacy drive. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what he set out to do, but actually, man, he also did set out to use that to his advantage. So whether people like it or not, it's just the truth. But generally, it's there in Nigeria. Whether Tinubu was there or whoever would be there. So I see a lot of forums. I listen to a lot of people. And yes, they are the minority of people, and it's all, it's you would say Nigerians are smart people, like I said, but they ain't thinking about all this. It's the ethnic. If you vote for this person, would bread be cheaper in your locality? Would it be easier to transport yourself to your hometowns? It probably will not be. In fact, to quote one of his statements, he talked about how the federal government cannot be broke. His own quote. He said, as far as the federal government is in charge of printing money, that is the economic policy that he's coming in with. And it will be interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know what's going to happen.
To see.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Which is consistent, by the way, with the current policy. Remember that Governor Baseki did say that basically Nigeria was printing money at their monthly allocations, that it's, they will just print money and distribute. So Tinubu is saying to us, and we've seen the consequences, right? We've seen the spike in everything, people can no longer afford food because, we are going, it's a Zimbabweanization of the Nigerian currency, where at some point, unless you have disciplined economic policy, Nigerians are going to take a wheelbarrow to, take the money to buy a loaf of bread. But, so that's what Tinubu is promising, that there will be no scarcity of Naira because, he can always print it.
At least Zimbabwe had a legitimate situation. It had a clampdown by the Western powers who felt they needed a say in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe got to the point where they were like, you're not going to have a say. It's a much more complex situation, and then they ended up in that situation. Nigeria is just waking up to cut off his nose to spite his face. That's exactly what it is. You have a collection of people. If you feel you don't want to be in a country with all these people, you need to sit down and ask yourselves, what next? If you feel you want to be in a country with these people, but you have reservations here and there, you need to sit down and ask yourself, how do we go about it? And if you feel these people are all polar opposites, you should sit down and be like, how do we go our separate ways? But you don't want to sit down. You want the status quo to continue, because your entire hope is that your person will get into power, which is a 0.000% of possibilities. I was watching Ruben Abati talk about when he was working for, he was on an interview this morning. Well, not this morning, the previous interview, when he was working for the prior president, Jonathan, and how it happened. And I sent it to my mom, and my mom is like, yeah, that's what happens everywhere, because we've all experienced it. When you are in office or when you're in a position of influence in Nigeria, serious influence, everybody comes to you.
Yeah.
The moment that position ends or is about to end, the 60, 70 people, you're not going to see them. My father used to be an assistant controller general of customs. Man, he had big houses everywhere he was in, and there was never any space in the house. And the moment he retired,
nobody came around.
Yeah, just you and your family and your dog, which somebody even ate our dogs. So, I think
oh my gosh. No. A lot of Oyibo people will be traumatized.
Well, hey, there are places where people eat dogs, and we're one of those places, and they ate my dog. So what can I say, man? Just, I think despite us, that there must be nobody in our house.
So for me, this is what's particularly bad about what transpired on February 25. I'm worried about young people, because for decades and decades, young people were somewhat apathetic about politics. They were disconnected, alienated, distant. They felt it had nothing to do with them, which enabled a lot of, charlatans and crooks and so on to run the place. And then finally, I think that it will be by a stroke of fortune, I would say, ignited something in young people, or young people somehow adopted him as the repository of their dreams, of their hope for a different country. And they farmed out, and they campaigned for him, and they mobilized themselves, and to all the cynical sort of responses that, some of them will not have even their PVCs and so on. they mobilized and they got their PVCs, and then they stood in line. Some of them were stabbed, some of them were threatened, and they stood in line to vote. And so for this to happen to them, I can't quite predict if they return to apathy. Is going to be such a destructive depth of apathy that a country cannot afford to do that. It cannot afford its youth, its most vibrant and vital demographic, to tune out of the country and to start acting in a very immoral way. But there's also a possibility that if there's another NSAS kind of movement, that the youth are going to go for broke. They're going to say, let's burn this country to the ground, because we can't change it through the ballot box. We can't change it through persuasion, which was what they tried to do through in the first NSAS movement, right? And then they tried through the electoral process, and they've been frustrated. So I dread to contemplate how young people are going to respond if they rise a second time. But of course, they could also go absolutely in the direction of just saying to Nigeria, you don't exist anymore as far as we are concerned. We're not going to, there's no incentive to be moral beings and to respond to Nigeria in any way that is in any way that is productive. And yet we know that young people are the ones who hold Nigeria together. They are the glue for the country, right? They're the ones who, from time to time, are able to transcend all these false divisions along ethnic, religious, state, clan, cultural lines, right? They're the ones who are the most creative sector in the country. Look at the movie industry, look at the music industry, look at tech, high tech, and so on. It's young people who are driving all of this. The old are still in the mindset that there's this oil thing which they can go and drink, you know, and then it will fill their guts. Very soon, the world is moving away from all of that fossil fuel habit. And some of them don't realize that the time has changed. So my concern is what happens to young people if somehow all the resources within the country, the judicial resources, the political activist resources, and just every other non-governmental organizations and Nigerians in the diaspora, if all these resources do not sort of act in concert to say that this impunity, this outrage must not stand, it's going to be devastating what happens going forward in the country. Because clearly, if Tinubu takes office, and there have been rigged elections have been rigged in the past. It's almost like it's a Nigerian habit. And by the way, there is another point that I wanted to make. Nigerians would typically justify the kind of election that was held on February 25. We'll use the phrase, no election is perfect. It's a very annoying, it's a peculiarly Nigerian form of stupidity. No election is perfect. And then they will point to some country, after all, in the US, 2020 there was this, or 2026 there was something, 2016 there was something. Mm-hmm. What they don't understand is that there's a difference between an election not being perfect and an election being imperfect by its very nature. So Nigerian elections are imperfect. Imperfection is the definition of them, right? You see too many people killed. You see too many ballot boxes snatched by thugs. You see too many people with their heads bashed in. You see too many falsifications of results. Okay, you see technology failing, not in isolated places, but on a wide scale. That is not no election is perfect. This is no election should be imperfect by definition. So it's important to underscore that.
Yeah. It's Nigerian elections have never been good. Nigerian census are even the worst things ever. Been one of the worst things in terms of the process to ever exist in mankind, which says a lot. Which says a lot. So it's not. This was a different case. This is not. This was just result writing, really. Just rigging is like, okay, you're going to lose, but you're going to lose by 10 points somewhere around that, and then you go and rig, and then you win by 10 points or 15 points. That's kind of rigging. This is that you're going to. Some of the results we're seeing where they're trying to justify it in places where in northern states where even the Labour Party was winning in northern states outright from what the results we're seeing. So it's not even. It's like people are tired of the system and they want something different. So that being said, Nigeria historically, I mean, to be honest, I don't know, a lot of people might not want to hear this, but historically, it's been a relatively elastic country. And what do I mean by that? They absorb almost anything. It's weird. It's weird. And when you put it in context of even Africa, countries that are not doing anywhere close to Nigeria is doing, the Congos, Africa's war, as it's called in Congo, that has been going on since before Nigeria's independence, right? It's still going on as it's back and forth. So many of these wars, Algeria is always in troubled times. Tunisia is always back and forth. So many of these places have been in more serious conflict. Rwanda has been in far more. Yes, the Nigerian Civil War, the Biafra War was terrible. But even when you just impose that to where we run to, which everybody in Nigeria cannot run out of the country, but where we run to, the Americas, the European countries, the Asian countries, if you pick one war from a lot of these places, and you take a look at the amount of human, again, it might seem somewhat cynical, but the price of progress a lot of these countries have paid. It's we haven't even ever come close to forget what we have a certain level of animosity against each other. Maybe that's partially it because we haven't gone. Igbos and Yorubas can jaw at each other for all they want. Historically, they've never gone at each other. Never. Before the British came, after the British came, they've never actually sat down, and there have been more Fulani fights to Yoruba fights in Lagos than there have ever been Igbos and Yorubas, right? So they can jaw at each other. But if you take that especially outside of Africa, to make the point more clear, it'll be a lot clearer, you pick maybe any one war. Which war would I pick for you? World War II, Belgian crisis, Russia-Japanese war, the Korean Unification War. I could go back the different revolutions within the French Revolution, the different fights before the French Revolution, the amount of people, the American Revolutionary Wars, the American Civil Wars,
the Cultural Revolution in
the
China,
amount of human beings. Soviet Union alone lost over 20 million people in World War II alone. We have not even, Biafra War, we're talking of, it was maybe 3 million people, somewhere.
3 million.
3 million people. We haven't even come, and this is the price most of these countries have had to pay. There are wars during the American Civil War. There are battles during the American Civil War. That America lost more people than they lost in Iraq and Afghanistan combined till tomorrow. But the most deadly wars, we haven't gone there. And I'm not saying this to scare anybody. In some ways, I'm I don't even know if there's a point that Nigeria can finally snap and be like, look, either we're going to get this right or we are all going to die trying to get it. To borrow a phrase, get rich or die trying kind of thing, right? Either we'll do that or something. I'm not sure we ever get there. I don't know.
Okay. Well, the thing is, I don't think we can actually afford. Nigeria has been elastic. We've gone from crisis to crisis. I remember in the 1980s when Babangida was military dictator, he gave an interview where he said he couldn't quite understand how Nigeria was able to survive, because Babangida knew the kind of damage he'd inflicted on that country, and somehow the country was still going. Like they energize a battery, it just keeps going and going. But I think that is going at too high a cost to its citizens. I see, for example, the fire that was set to a market in Lagos, in the aftermath of the February 25 elections. In Nigeria, if it is in some countries around the world, there's insurance. A lot of those businessmen, traders, and so on would have insurance companies pay for the damage to their goods and so on. But in Nigeria, you can be sure that most of those traders are on their own. Their loss is final. So in one night, in one act of arson, you find huge wealth just wiped off the table. So somebody could be a millionaire today in terms of the stock inventory that he has in his store, and then the next day he can't quite afford to eat. Okay, so people cannot continue to pay the price, or the people who were killed, the people who were stabbed in the last elections, right? Actually, for me, it's not worth it. Okay, lives should not be wasted so that one buffoon will sneak into power and steal yet more money from a country that has lost so much of it. But anyway, we have it's actually a very short episode today because I'm hitting the road, and it's time for really for us to say we'll return to you in another week, hopefully, and there'll be a lot more to say, and we're looking at the developments, and people are daring to hope that the courts would look at the evidence dispassionately, and for the first time in the country's tortuous history, do the right thing.
You do know that I think 7 of the 9 judges have had sanctions against them from the EU and the US government for previous election
rulings. Yeah, so we'll see.
This is it's already spawned. Trust Nollywood. They've already spawned a whole bunch of movies. Trust the music industry. People have released songs. LP. People have released songs. So we just laugh. Suffering and smiling to a quote fella, right?
Smiling. Yeah.
We take it day by day and we see what's happening. I think it's sad. I think it's awful. I don't even think Peter Obi, I've never said out, and I'll say it again. I don't think Peter Obi winning is the solution. It could be if you start restructuring the country, but it's not the solution in itself.
So here's the beginning. I think that if he becomes president, I think that Obi becomes sort of the beginning of something more fundamental that needs to happen in that country. But just as it is, I think that the old order in Nigeria got a notice from Nigerians on February 25, and they know that Nigerians fired them, that they were fired. So if they retain their job come May, if their president, the APC runs a presidency, it is a stolen presidency. It will be clear, and I, for one, want to make that clear. The same way I made it clear. I made it clear when Yaradua was foisted on Nigerians. I took a moral position that I'll never call him President Yaradua because he wasn't president. So I will wait out and see how the courts rule on this. But it is clear to me that Tinubu was not legitimately, credibly elected president. In fact, I'm sure that he was legitimately, credibly rejected by Nigerians. and I think that that's a good place to stop it today. And so we thank you again for joining us on this podcast, and we look forward to you being part of our conversation again in a matter of days. Thank you very much, and blessings.
All right, thank you. Next episode. All right.